G'day folks, quite a few people have asked over the years where I get my avatar from. Is it something I've created myself? Have I taken it from somewhere else? This video is about explaining the origins of that avatar. And the origins go back to 1915 and the Gallipoli campaign. In particular, it was in that year that a man by the name of David Barker submitted that illustration to a compilation of works of art and stories that Australia's official war correspondent Charles Bean was compiling for what would eventually become known as the Anzac book. This is a recent reproduction of the Anzac book, but it's pretty much faithful to the original. It retains all the original art and stories that were published in 1916. And on page 35, here we have the original work by David Barker. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about David Barker, but this is the image that is the basis, the foundation for my avatar. David Barker, Gallipoli 15, at the landing and here ever since. Drawn in blue and red pencil by David Barker. Now, just to distinguish my avatar from David's work and to kind of keep the original as is, I did a quick mock-up of David's illustration in a black pen, and that now serves as a basis rather than the original. If you go to my Board Game Geek profile, I give credit to David Barker. If you hover over the image, you'll be able to see the reference to At the Landing and Here Ever Since from the Anzac book, page 35. Now, there's quite a story behind this work of art, this cartoon, and David's work as an artist. Now, David was born in 1888 in a small town called Geneva, which is on the border between Victoria and South Australia. Now, he studied art at the Royal Art Society in Sydney before moving to the United States and continuing his art and his education in the Academy of the Fine Arts in Philadelphia. When war broke out, he travelled back to Australia, and in early 1915, in April 1915, he enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force. Now, the Australians have kept remarkable records from the First World War. It makes Australian history of the First World War, and I am an Australian historian principally of the First World War. It makes our work really fascinating because we have, relative to the rest of the world, one of the most robust series of records. I can access nominal rolls, I can access embarkation rolls, which will show me the details of the ship that David embarked on when he left Australia in May 1915. I know that he left on the HMAT Ajana, the A31, on the 31st of May. These embarkation rolls also tell me his regimental number, his rank at the time, his age. It borrows a lot of information from his service records, summarising his trade or calling, whether he was married or single, his address, next of kin and so forth, religion. Beyond that, that's often a quick reference guide, but I can also dive into his service records, his full service records. These have also been digitised and are available at the Australian National Archives of Australia. You can search for a soldier, retrieve their digitised record within a matter of minutes, and this can tell me his full name, David Barker. It tells me where he was born, how old he was, his occupation, artist. It tells me where he lived, and it has a full record of his service, including different units he served with, any injuries, any medals, any correspondence with the government, and so forth. So we get a lot of information from David, about David rather, during his war years. And we know that David was assigned as an orderly to Charles Bean in December 1915. This is around the time Bean was collecting this material for the Anzac book, and Barker features quite prominently in the Anzac book. And because we came to know Bean quite well, we actually have a photograph of David Barker. This is David, third from the left, reportedly, and the man to his left, the fourth man from the left, is Charles Edwin Woodrow Bean, at the time the official war correspondent and later Australia's official historian of the First World War. Now, it's very rare to get a photo like this of a soldier that we're analysing. But yeah, there's David there, third from the left. So David submitted a number of works of art, principally, to the Anzac book, and he does feature quite prominently throughout. There's a number of David's images. Here's another one, and yeah, quite a few throughout. Very common for him to use his blue and red pencil. That seemed to be a common style of his throughout the book. The idea behind the Anzac book was that Charles been put out submission to the soldiers. And he told the story of how he collected these submissions, compiled them, edited them, and produced them in this book. The book was, at the time, sold by Castle and Company in London. It was priced at 2 shillings and 6pence, and the proceeds went to the Patriotic Fund connected with the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps at the time. Now, the story goes that Bean simply picked a representative sample from among the soldiers, and that's been the story in Australian popular consciousness for many decades. But in the mid-1980s, a colleague of mine at the University of New England, a colleague at the moment, he's Emeritus Professor David Kent, he went into these records, he went to Bean's records to find out what other images Bean had received. And what he found in the archives was that Bean had rejected a lot of images, a lot of stories that didn't quite fit with the myth that he was trying to project. It revealed that Bean was quite selective. He rejected any material. This is from the soldiers themselves. So a lot of soldiers submitted material. He rejected any material where the soldiers are referring to cowardice or drunkenness, malingering, fights or arguments between men and their officers. David Kent goes on, and I quote from one of David's articles, personal suffering, the waste of life, and the dehumanising effects of warfare. And again, these are submissions from the soldiers themselves. These are the stories that the soldiers on Gallipoli were trying to tell to readers back at home, and Bean rejected those in favour of the images that went on to be published in the Anzac book. Now in 1985, when David Kent revealed this crafting that Bean was involved in, crafting a more positive, rewarding narrative around the Australian soldier and of Gallipoli and the Anzac experience. David Kent was confronted with threats from across Australia. He was bombarded with mail at the time, including death threats, suggesting that he should be sacked, a few people threatening to kill him, and the like. Now, this didn't deter David. David Kent went on to be one of Australia's leading historians. He was a colleague of mine, recently retired from the University of New England, and an outstanding scholar. A lot of his work really revolved around Australian cultural representations from the First World War. He's produced a lot of work around what the soldiers produced of this era. But his work on the Anzac book was really critical because it revealed, the careful crafting of this message back home to Australia. Now, David Barker was included in this message. His At the Landing and Here Ever Since was included, as were a number of his other works of art that do project a certain image of the Australian soldier. But it's worth keeping in mind that a lot was rejected as well. We have, again, fortunately from the First World War, a vast array of records. We have many trench and troopship newspapers. We have soldiers' diaries and letters, which gives us a better picture. For me, the reason I picked David Barker's image is that I think I can empathise with Barker's intent. He was trying in a single image to capture, I guess, the essence of that Australian soldier. He was trying to capture what the typical Australian soldier looked like at the time. They were tired, they were exhausted, they were rugged and raggedy, but often had a smile upon their face. And I'm, of course, a historian of the First World War, and for me, I could see what Barker was trying to achieve. I could empathise with his objectives. I liked what he was doing, and again, I saw what Barker was seeing in a way, in the sense of what he was trying to capture, what he was trying to convey to people at home. And for me, that really reflected a lot of what I had read in soldiers' diaries and letters, what I had seen in broader representations. I've also, like David Kent, have published on cultural representations, the use of humour, the use of imagery to convey ideas about who these people were. So David Barker was, of course, a soldier. So he's part of this representation. There's a bit of him in this image as well. And I think he's, at its essence, Barker is using this photo, this drawing, to try to capture that essence of who these Australians were. That's been the focus of my research, and that's why I chose that avatar many, many years ago to represent my online activity. All right, folks, I hope that has been of interest. Thanks for watching, and take care.